The level of violent crimes committed against girls and women in England and Wales has increased exponentially over the last decade. If you were to consume the mainstream media, read the papers, watch the mainstream news, then you would be actually led to believe that this increase in violence against women and girls can be laid almost exclusively at the door of male influencers such as Andrew Tate. But this is doing a massive injustice, not just to Mr. Tate, who I will confess to not being a massive fan of, but it's doing a massive injustice to the victims of violent and often sexually violent crimes. Now, I'm going to give my opinions here, and none of this is designed to diminish the suffering and the pain experienced by those who are victims of this type of crime. And as a stepdad of a 17-year-old teenage girl myself, I appreciate the importance of tackling particularly violent and particularly sexual crimes against women and girls. There's two serious factors to be taken into consideration when we look at the statistics, which do clearly show a massive increase in the number of these forms of crime being reported. Firstly, which I'll touch upon briefly, is the ways in which these crimes are reported and the nature of the crimes reported and recorded. I think more significant is the source of these crimes and what is actually the cause of this increase. But I think it would be remiss not to look at the crimes that are actually being recorded in the first place. There has, over the past decade, been a significant change in the way that many types of crime are recorded. There's also, thankfully, been an increase in the number of victims of crime coming forward and actually reporting their experiences, which is fantastic. But it might be that a crime that was committed 5, 6, 7 years ago would have been recorded differently to the way it is today. I would dare to suggest that a decade ago, for a crime to be recorded as a violent crime would have to have included some sort of physical, aggressive, violent altercation between the two parties. A violent crime can be now recorded for something which may not have actually included any physical contact between the two parties, both the victim and the perpetrator. Again, none of this is to diminish the suffering of people who experience harassment or stalking or one of the other crimes that is now recorded as a violent crime. However, the change in the way we record these crimes and the compartments and the boxes that we put these recorded crimes into will have an impact on the baseline numbers of these crimes. Historically, we would have only recorded a theft, for example, if someone was to break into our home and steal our possessions, or was to physically steal something from our person. Now, you could technically record a theft if it was a digital theft. So someone stole your intellectual property, or someone stole, an image off of your Facebook page. I don't know how these are specifically classified, but as media changes, as the way we interact changes, and with the rise of everything being computerized, automated, and the huge increase on social media, certain crimes will now be recorded in a different way to how they would have been a decade ago. And that will certainly go some way to explaining why these numbers are rising so exponentially. But let's look at the reason why these crimes are on the increase. Now, they blame Andrew Tate. They blame the misogyny. They blame this uprising toxic masculinity. Now, for full disclosure, I'm not a massive Andrew Tate fan. However, I do believe that some of the advice and some of the lessons and rules for life that he lays out for young men could potentially be beneficial to a lot of youngsters. He does preach hard work. He preaches working on yourself, becoming physically and mentally strong. And while some of his content does veer on the side of misogyny, I don't think that Andrew Tate personally, and this is my only personal opinion, is any more dangerous than a lot of the boss bitch influencers who tell women that they don't need a man, that they can do everything by themselves, that they don't need a man to raise a family, and all the rest of this. All right, it's a topic for another day. But I think it's just as dangerous to tell men they don't need women, or that they can just use women for their own gratification, is just as dangerous as telling a woman that she doesn't need a man to form a family. Okay, that's doing a disservice to each other, but also to society as a whole. So where else, apart from these changing attitudes on social media, can we lay the blame for this increase to violence against women and girls? Well, certainly I think it would be remiss to ignore online porn. I think the massive exponential increase in availability of online porn, and also the nature and the increasingly extreme and violent nature of online pornography, can't help but to burden some of the blame for this change in male attitudes, particularly amongst young men. Young men now have access, almost unfiltered access to the internet from a young age. And as someone who was, seemingly years ago now, but I was once a teenage boy, believe me, I understand that curiosity can lead you down some very strange and very dark paths at a young age if it allows you to. And I am grateful for being one of those last generations that didn't have access to the internet 24/7. Social media is getting a massive blame, and of course they're calling on the likes of Zuckerberg and Musk and what have you to ensure that better filters and better restrictions are put in place so that people cannot be harassed online, people cannot be stalked online, predators are not able to groom young girls online, and also that what is considered harmful content is filtered more effectively, and that there is an increased level of censorship. Now, of course, those first factors, cutting out and stalking, any predatory behaviour, grooming, etc., incredibly important. In terms of dangerous content, I think that is far too subjective to adequately implement a policy that's going to please everyone, basically. But again, I think whilst these platforms, and I'm no fan of social media, I've spoken out about social media and the societal ills that it has caused on many occasions. But again, I think it can be a bit of an easy scapegoat. It can be a bit of a straw man to kind of just go, yep, it's the fault of the social media companies. They are facilitating grooming, stalking, harassment, etc., etc. Therefore, it's their fault and it's their problem to resolve. I think that there is a large number of aging, bearded, the stereotype men who are grooming young girls online, I think is misjudged, misguided at best, and willfully ignorant at worst. Yeah, sure, these threats exist. Of course they do. There will always be bad people doing bad things. But the fact that you can read through all of these media articles and totally miss what I believe to be one of the biggest factors is, as I previously said, willfully ignorant, and dangerously so, dare I say. Now, I don't want to be one of these people who just sits online ranting about immigration. It's a massive, massive issue here in the UK and probably in whatever country you're watching this video in. However, I think the fact that immigration and the fact we have seen a massive influx over this same time period in which violent crime against women and girls has increased so much, I think is willfully ignorant to ignore. This decade-long increase in violent crimes against women and girls can only replicate or can only mirror a massive change in the demographic landscape of England and Wales over the same time period. I spoke previously about the new plans by Keir Starmer to reduce illegal immigration by raiding car washes and nail salons and the like. And I said, in that video, I said that I could find you that many illegal immigrants literally just by walking down the high street of my local town. And it is in these high streets, it's in these towns, and it's in these areas where harassment and sexual commentary and often physical sexual abuse of women and girls takes place. I'm not saying these people are exclusively to blame, but the very fact that you can read the papers, you can watch the mainstream media, and there will be more focus on Andrew Tate and the fact that he talks in a misogynistic way than there is about the mass immigration of fighting age young men from countries and from cultures where women aren't respected, don't have equality, and are treated in a second class and sometimes overtly sexual way. To ignore this and not in any way attempt to correlate these changes in the country's demographic to this massive increase in crime that we are experiencing is willfully ignorant. And I think the media needs to be taken to task on this. I'm no Andrew Tate fan, but he is getting substantial backlash for something that he has played, if anything, a tiny, tiny, tiny part in. and we are willfully ignoring such a substantial elephant in the room as a desperate means to cling on to this be kind, political correct agenda that we continue to perpetuate in this country, and that under a current government we are only at danger of continuing to perpetuate until a point where it's too late. I am very happy for people to come to this country. I have no issue with anyone based on their nationality, on their creed, on their skin colour, etc., etc. What I do have an issue with is willingly importing a large number of people from cultures which are dangerously contradictory to our own, and being unaware of so many tens or hundreds of thousands of others of unknown origin, and then willfully ignoring the fallout from these political decisions. People now need to be held accountable for what is happening in this country. And it's doing a disservice to those women and girls who are victims of violent or even non-violent crimes or sexual crimes to willfully ignore this. And it's doing a massive disservice to the young men of this country who will now be viewed with even more suspicion and will be blamed for even more of so-called toxic masculinity than they were before, when in 90% of examples, young men who are following Andrew Tate may just be doing because they want a role model and they need a role model. And he might not be the best role model, but trust me, you walk down any given high street and there are 100 worse examples loitering outside phone repair shops and Turkish barbers everywhere.